And one of the things I'd like to say is that I haven't been able to express myself about September 11th to anyone. And I've collected a massive amount of material about September 11th from hundreds of people who were there and who were peripheral to the events. And one of the things is that my reaction was to do what my parents taught me, which I believe Jesus taught all of you, to turn the other cheek and to help those who were suffering. And if we had done that, if we had transmuted the American message into one of caring in that instance, in that moment, what would the world be like today? The right would have you believe that there would be these massive nests of violent Muslims just blowing up cities all over the West. And having traveled in Muslim countries there and in India and in Europe and in the West, I don't believe that's true. I think we're better than that. I think that instead what happened was the violent military that backs the capitalists who sold globalism on the back of that military, the spine of which is the United States market, created enmity among people who are like, why do I have to have this here? Why can't I have our own? The opposite of what could have happened. So I'm really trying to express myself in this regard. And I've been pulling this material out for that purpose. And this is going well right now, so I'm going to keep going because I haven't even gotten this far ever before in expressing this. So I'm going to read to you from that day, and this is not from the day, but 1 year later I published a zine which is in many museums all over the country. It's in the Getty in Los Angeles, it's in the MoMA in New York, it's in many institutions, which this is the comment I wrote here. On September 11th, 2001, a concerned friend and I watched what happened in Manhattan on television and from the roof of our apartments in Brooklyn, and then made our way to the L train at roughly 1:45 in the afternoon. When we got off in Manhattan at 3rd Avenue and 14th Street, we made a mental note of the erasable board behind the clearly terrified young woman working in the booth. It said 237 L, B, D, F, and A are running, is what was printed there by an obviously shaky hand. We made our way southward toward the huge, billowing, toxic cloud that rose and drifted eastward from where the Twin Towers once stood. Within a few days, Dr. Neil Cohen and Mayor Giuliani, in nearly the same posture as when they told us helicopters would be spraying the city with insecticide to prevent West Nile virus, told us that there were not poisonous levels of toxins in the WTC debris cloud. Less than 3 months later, a UC Davis study showed never-before-seen levels of toxins in the air. And so the lies and omissions and artifices began. I hope I never see Manhattan like that again. It was chilling. Small handfuls of people were wandering slowly, numbly, weirdly loose in the normally bustling streets, which were totally devoid of automobile traffic. At one point, we stood in the center of Broadway, looking south, and there were no cars moving in either direction. We got only as far south as Houston Street before we encountered a blockade preventing foot traffic from approaching what would later become called Ground Zero, a name that still disgusts me. At Houston, crews of police cadets wearing the gray and tan of the non-commissioned, hardly trained to handle any situation, much less an unprecedented one like this, were being directed by officers to take their positions along Houston and prevent traffic from moving southward, at Houston. They were not competent to handle crowds in states of panic. They positioned themselves to prevent traffic southward. They didn't even know what to advise people who asked for directions. We walked along the line of young cadets from Broadway to First Street on Houston. We directed confused tourists to subways and informed the cops. The 237 LB, D, F, and A trains are running. Typically, most of the cops weren't even from New York. These suburban kids acting as cops had to be told where the trains could be caught and even which way they were going. We assisted people looking for ways off the island and instructed the cadets to write down the trains that were running and which way so they could help others. Everyone functioned perfunctorily, but with great care for one another. We stopped for a break at a bar on First Street. It was packed. Air Force jets were screaming overhead, but no one had any sound information about what was happening. At one point, it was announced on CNN that the U.S. had bombed Afghanistan that day. No one knew why. We wondered if it was true, knowing Congress would have had to invoke the War Powers Act. We made our way to a friend's place on 10th Street in the East Village, where we watched the television coverage, Bush's racist speech. And we interviewed our first eyewitness to the events at hand, a young woman who lived near the towers and who was at home when they were struck. The following day, I interviewed my second witness to the tragedy. Both of the first reliable witnesses to the events of September 11th in Manhattan that I interviewed clearly identified persons who were undercover and, I can only assume, working for the U.S. government, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, or the City of New York, but I still do not know who these people were, nor why they were where they were, nor why they were doing what they were doing. The area where the World Trade Center stood was called the Hot Zone by Mayor Giuliani on the first Sunday morning after the 11th of September. But very soon after that, Mayor Giuliani was obviously instructed by someone to always refer to the WTC site as Ground Zero, an overtly militant name for the site of the devastation that was visited upon our city. And the fiction began. And this is a zine that's filled with all kinds of fascinating pieces. So that describes a little bit of that day. So then Sunday came, and the Sunday shows had these guys all lined up one after another, boom, 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 boom. And I was in a state of shock about that there was no voice at all for peace here was shocking to me. We were disorganized. We weren't able to organize anyone at that time. They had all the power, all the communication. Planes were grounded. They had control of everything. And the only message was, we have to go to war. This is how. These are the steps. We have to attack Iraq over here. Irrelevant that there's no relationship to the attacks. Zero conversation about really investigating like a crime scene, which is what should have been done from the very first moment. None of that happened. It was crazy. So I had friends who were going to their offices in Manhattan on Monday, and some of them would have internet access. Very few, but some. And I gave them all something to send out because I was concerned about there being no voice. It's written with no author. It's titled The AWM, the Anti-War Movement Number 1. And I wrote it alone. There was no one around me. I didn't have a group of people. And I wrote it on a typewriter first, which I think I showed you on one of the other days. Every day I woke up and I typed at the end of the day what the day was like. Not on email where it could be erased or not. I typed everything. And again, that book has toured the country, and people saw it around, say, 15,000 people saw it as an art object. But this is what I said. And I guess what I wish is, like I said, we're immigrants from India. We moved here with the hope of making it a better place and with the excitement to be a part of something that is as great as the United States has been at times. And my dream is that there could have been a secular, peaceful response to this. So, as you might imagine, this was drowned out by the general noise. From the Balas Agency, I made up a little agency called the Raj Balas Agency, just to make it easy. I gave it a phone number and a one box account with a 212 phone number, and no one called it, but just gave it a face that wasn't me. The Balas Agency, to all. Subject, AWM number 1. Date, Sunday, September 16th, 2001, 8:09 p.m. to 9:30. So this took me about an hour and a half to write. The anti-war movement. At this point, the anti-war effort is attempting to establish a unified, broad coalition of interested parties who are of the same mind on the following issues. 1. Because all evidence against suspects in the WTC incident is circumstantial. Because this nation's justice system is founded on the principle of due process. Because rescue and recovery require time, debris considerably more, and grieving has just begun. Because arrests and charges have not yet been made public, and a grand jury has not yet fairly been convened. Because Osama bin Laden has denied involvement in the WTC collapse, and the U.S. federal government has yet to disclose sufficient intelligence to justify the accusation of a link to any one suspect. And because many citizens and non-citizens of the U.S. alike disapprove of American acts of aggression overseas that would be detrimental to innocent civilians. We, the members of the anti-war movement, demand an end to all U.S. acts of aggression until a final investigation into the events of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001 has been completed. It is our concern that the executive and legislative branches of the United States government are acting in a foreign theater without the consent of a willing majority of the United States, of the Americas, of the world. Many of the population urge restraint and no retaliation, at least until several things occur. 1. Rescue and recovery, disposal of debris. 2. Criminal investigation. 3. Full intelligence disclosure prior to acts of war or aggression on foreign soil. 4. Clarity of purpose in armed conflict. The anti-war movement charges media misconduct and accuses much of U.S. media too quick to support the Bush administration's rush to judgment regarding the collapse of the World Trade Centers. Further, encourages that anti-war should be swiftly taught at all public and private educational centers. Kay Riegel of Brooklyn advises humanism is not radical and proposes 1. Education campaign about anti-racism and nonviolence in academic and religious environments. 2. Working with pre-existing groups of Asian Americans. 3. Mobilize to make newspapers and other media diversify the voices and the content of the mainstream press. 4. Demand that journalists working in news and news analysis open their minds to cultural differences as well as similarities and be responsive to their approach to communication. One member of the movement asks, is a legal team available to address in a timely fashion for the first Monday in October, forcing the executive and legislative branches to cease and desist war efforts, further to investigate intelligence gathering and security measures? Is this a case on the grounds of Pentagon Papers, First Amendment case, 1971, to demand full disclosure of investigation of domestic incidents? With no power to investigate, the anti-war movement requests assistance of legal minds and investigators to explore the possibility concurrent to the efforts of the federal government. Media review. Print. Sunday New York Times, September 16th. Week in Review and Op-Ed section. A. The Clamor of a Free People by L. Greenhouse, balanced, sound, and well-written, clearly reminded us that trying times and political climates can result in weakness in decision-making, made clear deliberate efforts to remark upon the treatment of ethnic minorities, Interview with A. Etzenoy of George Washington University Sociology was an excellent choice. B. Both lead opinions of the paper were clear, but In for the Long Haul was realistic, while The Faces Emerge was far too swift. C. Liberties, The Modernity of Evil by Maureen Dowd. A terrible graph suggesting domain way beyond rights. Quote, why not start fresh and fast with a new security agency, unleashing an elite squad with plenty of human spies, and putting Rudy Giuliani in charge of the global untouchables? You know, your freedom to speak the way you spoke at that time, I was able to observe vicariously. Extremely irresponsible text in light of the current political climate. D. Fighting an Elusive Enemy, D.M. Kennedy of Stanford. This piece, while calm, assured, and generally balanced, secreted a single line with which the anti-war movement cannot agree. Quote, we must retaliate for the crimes of September 11th. Close quote. Not without a perpetrator yet identified through due process. Sunday television. Vice President Cheney on Meet the Press. At the 9:13 mark, the casual shoulder toss when using for the first time a convivial Pax to describe presumably Pakistani citizens or people was to me an insult. Yeah, the Pax are on our side. A term he uses twice. Note Cheney's power. Quote, don't talk to me until Sunday, and then I want an hour with Russert with one commercial interrupt at the halfway point. That's what he achieved. No one saw Cheney. 5 days. The vice president was invisible, non-seen for 5 days. Then he shows up on this show and wants to talk to one guy, says whatever he wants. Was it taped? Do you have to ask? Russert states all the bad words. OBL's name uttered by Russert twice before a single Mr. Bin Laden from Cheney. That was the 9:10 mark. Also, Russert uses term ultimatum, not the vice president. Repeated collusions stimulate questions from the anti-war effort. We're talking about media here. This week on ABC, 10:30 Eastern. Excellent opening 6 minutes. Good tempo, good overview. Bob Woodruff in Islamabad, solid. Show opened strong. Lisa Stark, the only woman in the broadcast at that point, was given the good news. Ray, commercial flights resuming. Commercial flights resumed on that Sunday. But then the fireworks. Donald Rumsfeld is far too aggressive and must be asked to stand down. Ashcroft equally reprehensible in request for greater surveillance powers. This is a failure in intelligence. You have failed. Why should we give you more tools before a full evaluation of your use of the current ones? Then, when the flagging Rumsfeld was cut loose and analysis turned over, John McQueethy permanently marred what was Brinkley's this week. Cokie Roberts is soundly uprated for the 1054 nonsense, quote, congressional reaction is real, not just for the cameras, close quote. Everything you all do is for the cameras. However, terrorism czar was a good save. This is a domestic issue. CNN, 11:30, Evans and Novak. Richard Pearl, chairman of the Defense Policy Board, is the first to mention in calm terms nonviolent options, diplomatic solutions implied. MSNBC, 11:38 Eastern. Mayor Giuliani is commended as first to say the hot zone, replacing ground zero at 11:38 Eastern. All use of term ground zero from that moment is overtly militant. Accusation without evidence is prejudice. I'm going to repeat that. Accusation without evidence is prejudice. Do not firewall executive decisions. States R. Jumper, 12 September 01, 2140. The anti-war movement commends the incredible city of New York. Remember, only a tiny population of human beings have internet access right now. And 25% of humans can't read. At this writing, internet access at all Brooklyn public libraries is still not available, being blamed on a router outage at the hot zone 2 miles away. The primary elections set for the 25th of September, 105th and 106th mayors leading memorial in Central Park on the 23rd of September. That was what I wrote at the end of Sunday. This is the book AWM. There were 5 of those each day. Reacting to the people who were selling the war at an intense volume to the world from the instant this stuff happened. So this is number 2. From the Balas Agency to all. Subject, anti-war movement number 2. Monday, 17 September 2001, 3:10 in the afternoon. The anti-war movement praises and commends the incredible city of New York, Richard Grasso of the NYSE, the NASDAQ, other financial centers, and communications employees working multiple overtime to return communications and subsequently other sectors to function. Adds commendations to Giuliani, fire, and police. Heroes. Workers congratulated and thanked for efforts. Love your colleagues and neighbors. Media conduct. Print. New York Post receives commendation for printing partial list of names of lost city officials, firemen, police, rescue workers, and victims. Newsday also noted. The New Yorker magazine receives commendation for totally appropriate, informative, and comprehensive issue available today. Demands attention, provides support and comfort for grieving and dazed. Anti-war effort thanks Hertzberg, quote, the scale notwithstanding, a more useful metaphor than war is crime. The terrorists of September 11 are outlaws within a global polity. The goal of foreign and military policy must be to induce recalcitrant governments to cooperate, a goal whose attainment may or may not entail the use of force, but cannot usefully entail making general war on the peoples such governments rule, and in some cases, that of Afghanistan, for example, oppress. Editor Remnick and entire staff commended and applauded for stunning work in the face of tragedy. Susan Sontag received special note for supremely courageous and forward-thinking contribution. All New York City educators applauded. Anti-war movement encourages the propagation of nonviolence and anti-war ideology. Time magazine slapped for too much image too soon and with poor editorial discretion. A stunned anti-war populace begs taming of images released, or at least taming of the accompanying texts. Warmongering is good for no one, particularly not for children. Max Fish on Ludlow to host photographs from downtown area during rescue and recovery, opening set for Thursday, 27 September. Gratitude and commendations to all New Yorkers. Anti-war movement will attend memorial with mayors Dinkins and Koch. Set for Central Park, Sunday, 23rd September. Remember, primary election set for 25th September. Number 3, Thursday, 20th September, 2001. There's a gap there, and what I remember is the rain that finally fell. From the Balas Agency to all. Subject, AWM number 3, Brooklyn, anti-war movement. Everything is about time frame and its suitability in places that are 13 hours apart. From US EDT, where Bush and Cheney are, to GMT, where Blair and Chirac are, to GMT plus 7, which is where Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India are. Tonight at 2100 hours, 20th September, that's on Eastern Time, U.S. Executive Officer Commander-in-Chief George W. Bush will address the U.S. That means at 9 a.m. on the East Coast and 1 to 3 in the morning in Britain, France, and Germany, and 3 o'clock in the morning until dawn from there to India. George W. Bush will be addressing the entire region and presumably the world. The anti-war movement gravely and politely requests that all future U.S., Afghan, Pakistan-related public communications intended for far-reaching broadcast, be scheduled for morning in the US, noon GMT, and before sunset in Delhi. This would be one simple, nonviolent, diplomatic way to decrease tension between all people of all places by allowing for proper rest between communication for all parties. It is 10:21 in the morning in New York. Between 6 and 9 tonight, advisors to the president will be discussing what he should say at 9 p.m. Pause. The anti-war movement notes nationwide disapproval in Pakistan of Pakistani leadership's role in the exchange of communications described above as per Gallup poll conducted on the 19th of September. So Cheney's PACs are not down, friends. With far greater majority of Pakistani population in disagreement with communications on behalf of the United States. The anti-war movement demands a cessation to all military acts until proper diplomatic channels of communication have been established. Slow down time frame. Meanwhile, William Safire of the New York Times was presumably spiritually secure enough to write content for Voice of America broadcasts in the area. Quote, "The nation is on a kind of war footing, even in peacetime. News credibility does not flow from splitting the moral difference between good and evil. In the climate of today's undeclared war, private media in democracies are free to take either or neither side. But U.S. taxpayer-supported broadcasting is supposed to be on our side. That's why we need an American signal in Afghanistan's 5 languages with a clear, truthful message. Bin Laden and his gang are the cause of present and future misery, and the suicides who murder innocents are eternally punished by Allah." Close quote. Safire in the Times. Online, 20th September. To which the anti-war movement responds, "Using the name of God that belongs to another culture that is not your own is, to my understanding, universally reprehensible. The anti-war movement considers it certainly undiplomatic. The anti-war effort notes the presentation by CNN at 9 this morning, EDT US, of the Reuters translated communique from members of Afghanistan's Grand Islamic Council who have rejected US demand delivered by Pakistan that bin Laden be handed over to stand trial for the September 11th terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. The clerics said bin Laden should be asked to leave within a suitable time frame for the good of the country, but they did not suggest what would constitute a suitable time frame." This is the translation of that. The anti-war movement salutes the New York Times' B. Herbert for the commendation of Giuliani during the crisis, the right answer, and heartily approves of the civic responsibility encouraged by Herbert when stating, quote, "Mr. Giuliani has been magnificent in the city's darkest hour. It would be a shame if he followed that up by attempting to dim the light of the city's democratic process." Close quote. The anti-war effort also notes the NYT's P. Taylor and E. Sciolino, Bush advisors split on scope of retaliation. Quote, "Secretary of State Colin Powell argued during weekend meetings with Mr. Bush that the administration must take the time to prepare the diplomatic groundwork for American military action. First in Afghanistan by consulting with allies and building the case to justify American actions under international law. We can't solve everything in one blow," said an administration official who has sided with Secretary Powell. Mr. Bush and Secretary Powell also met with Russia's Foreign Minister Igor D. Ivanov, who expressed Russian concerns about the use of military force in Central Asia, formerly under Soviet control. Charlie Wilson's war. The Russians already are providing intelligence information, and Mr. Ivanov pledged to cooperate in other ways. Close quote. The anti-war movement encourages all to communicate with President George W. Bush and the U.S. media corporations that there is a large worldwide disapproval of war. The anti-war movement requests further the mobilization of all living Nobel Peace Prize winners and public figures opposed to armed conflict. Human shields. So that was 10 days. The first 10 days after the attacks. I was writing this stuff and my friends were mailing it around. We sent it, there's a list of people we sent it to. That's kind of interesting, actually. It's worth looking at. Because I was working in media at the time, I was pretty familiar with a lot of the industry. And no one was saying the kind of things I was saying. Certainly not when we were all quite stunned, but also because people were following orders and they were believing what they were told with no better information, or there was no one saying what I'm saying here. There was no alternative option. There was only Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld telling us this is what we absolutely have to do right now. So I was trying to communicate something else, a non-violent pacifist option. That's what I was trying to do with this set of emails. And I want to show you who we sent it to, because that was really difficult in those days, just sitting there trying to so this is who we always sent that to. Slate, Salon, the New York Times, InTheseTimes.com, Democrats.com, Amnesty International, the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Christian Science Monitor, Greenpeace, AsianDubFoundation.org, Human Rights Watch, New York, Washington, LA, SF, London, and Brussels, United Federation of Teachers, Writers Guild of America, BlackPlanet.com, Atlantic Monthly, Harper's Bazaar, New Republic, The Nation, Utne Reader, McSweeney's, Hoover Institution, and Booklyn.org, which was an organization that I was helping to make. And this was the first thing that we sent out. Before those, the very first thing we sent out, the night of Saturday, the 15th, before they started their pitch for war on Sunday morning. Anti-war movement. Order mandated by law. I oppose war on foreign soil on the following grounds. 1. Deal with the bereaved and the grieving and cleanup. Domestic issue time, 1 to 2 months. 2. Investigation into crime to properly identify perpetrators. All evidence circumstantial. No arrests as yet properly justified to the public. 3. Congress and the president must allow for due process of law before acting on intelligence reports, or all intelligence must be made public before U.S. government takes foreign military action. 4. If a Christian-Muslim war is to begin, I, the undersigned, conscientiously object. Public referendum on retaliation in all American cities. Referendum is demanded by significant population of Americans who fear executive and legislative branches are engaging in conflict too soon. Referendum is demanded by significant populations who fear the executive and legislative branches are engaging in conflict without proper evidence or without publicizing proper intelligence. People of all cities resist vengeance and war. Every minute that a civil anti-war protest does not occur will be taken by the executive branch of the U.S. government as tacit public approval for violence. So that was my first 10 days in reaction